All right, let's just jump right in. Today we're going through a pretty fascinating explainer covering a story called The Little Blue Dinosaur Who Couldn't Roar. Now, I know what you're thinking. It sounds like a simple kid's book, right? But honestly, as we break this down, you're going to see it packs a massive punch. It's really about playing to our unique strengths, leaning into emotional intelligence, and, well, totally rethinking how society measures our value. I mean, think about how often we just automatically assume the loudest person in the room is the most capable. This story, it completely flips that idea on its head.
So what actually makes someone a true hero? Take a second and really think about that. Because usually we associate bravery with being the loudest or the strongest, right? We picture that super aggressive competitor or the most assertive person in a meeting. It's a stereotype that's drilled into us from day one. But here, we're going to see how one tiny dinosaur basically challenges that entire assumption, turning the classic hero's journey upside down by using what we'd probably call soft power today.
Which brings us to part one of our story, the big problem, and dealing with the stigma of being different.
Picture this. We're in the vibrant, colorful Dino Valley, and we meet our main guy, Danny. Danny's this tiny blue dinosaur, bright green eyes, wagging tail, and he's got one massive, really awkward problem. See, every single morning, the whole community does a roar practice. And this is where we see a huge clash between what society expects and Danny's actual reality. On one hand, you've got these massive dinosaurs shaking the earth with this huge, deafening roar. And on the other hand, well, Danny opens his mouth and lets out this tiny, literal mouse-like squeak. We've all been there, right? That feeling of just being the odd one out, trying to do something that absolutely does not match how you're naturally wired.
And, as you might guess, the crowd's reaction is not great. The other dinosaurs stop what they're doing and just burst out laughing, basically telling him he sounds like a mouse. It's brutal. It leaves Danny feeling totally inadequate, and he has this heartbreaking thought, I wish I had a real roar. And right there, that's our core emotional hurdle. Danny is measuring his entire self-worth against a metric he literally cannot achieve. It's basically prehistoric imposter syndrome. He feels worthless just because he doesn't fit the standard mold of success.
All right, moving on to part two, a wise friend's advice. Enter the mentor.
Feeling totally alienated, Danny wanders off into the forest. And who does he run into? The classic mentor figure. In this case, it's an owl named Oliver hanging out in an old tree. Danny just spills his guts, confessing his insecurities, saying he's never going to be a real dinosaur because he can't roar. But Oliver just listens quietly and drops this absolute gem. Not every hero needs the loudest voice. Now, Danny doesn't really get it in that moment, but this is huge. It completely foreshadows how Danny's weird, unconventional little quirk is going to end up saving the day. Which leads us right into part three, the rescue mission, where we see a major contrast in action.
So suddenly, out of nowhere, there's a crisis in the peaceful valley. A tiny baby triceratops gets stuck near a muddy swamp and starts crying for help. Immediately, the big dinosaurs rush over. And what's their big strategy? Brute force, obviously. They just roar. They roar as loudly as they possibly can, basically using a hammer when they actually need a scalpel. And the result? Yeah, it backfires completely. The poor baby gets even more terrified and starts crying even louder. The valley's leaders are actively making things worse because they're totally confusing volume with effectiveness.
But then, Danny steps up, and he reads the room totally differently. His emotional intelligence is just off the charts here. First, he observes. He remembers this tiny, crucial detail. The baby loves little birds. Then, instead of trying to outroar the big guys, he leans into his natural ability. He just makes his gentle, tiny, squeak, squeak sound. He realizes that his biggest perceived weakness is actually the exact tool needed right now. He uses empathy and nuance to de-escalate the situation where brute force was failing miserably.
And the impact, it is instant. The baby stops crying and actually smiles. Just let that sink in for a second. The absolute power of a gentle approach. Instead of running away, the baby slowly walks right over to Danny. And because Danny creates this vibe of safety and calm, he's able to gently guide the little triceratops right out of the swamp while the whole valley cheers him on. He didn't conform to the aggressive norm. He leveraged his own quiet nature to solve a massive problem.
So let's look at part four, redefining bravery and the true meaning of heroism.
After this wild rescue, the king dinosaur steps up and basically forces the whole community into a paradigm shift. Look at the contrast here on the slide. The old way was loud, it was aggressive, and it actively made things worse by scaring the baby. But Danny's new way, it's kind, it's gentle, and it actually calms the baby down. The community has to look at these two side by side and completely reevaluate their entire value system.
Then the king delivers this absolute mic drop moment for the valley. Being loud doesn't make you brave. Being kind does. I mean, how often do we confuse being loud with being effective in our own lives? Right here, the king separates volume from actual value. It totally rewrites the rules. It validates Danny's entire existence and proves that heroism doesn't just look one way. Compassion, empathy, and gentleness, they are just as courageous as physical strength.
So the dinosaurs all smile and give 3 huge cheers for Danny. And in this incredibly sweet, pivotal moment of self-acceptance, Danny decides to try and roar one last time. And what comes out? Squeak! But you know what? The context is entirely different now. Nobody mocks him. Instead, they all just laugh with pure joy and total acceptance. Even Danny laughs. He is finally comfortable in his own skin, realizing that this thing he thought was a flaw was actually his superpower the whole time.
Bringing us to our final section, Part 5, the ultimate takeaway and discovering your special talent.
From that day on, the story tells us Danny never wished for a bigger roar again. He finally knew that a kind heart is just infinitely more powerful. So let's wrap this explainer up by bringing it back to reality. What are the key takeaways here? Number 1, everyone has a special talent. Whether you're a quiet observer, an introverted leader, whatever, you bring something totally unique to the table. Number 2, you do not have to be the loudest to be a hero. In real-life crises, the best solutions usually come from active listening and soft power, not shouting. And lastly, the smallest voice can truly make the biggest difference. Your unique traits, even the ones that feel totally insignificant in a loud world, are just strengths waiting for the right moment. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on today. How can you use your own smallest voice to make a big difference? What's that one unique trait you have that maybe doesn't fit the traditional loud mold, but could bring some much-needed calm, kindness, or insight to a chaotic situation? Take a look at your own talents and think about how you can use quiet strength to be a hero in your own valley today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.